Hi, I'm Rob Kepp. I'm posting this analysis of the geoeconomics of regime collapse in Afghanistan. If you've been watching the news, you're aware of the chaos unfolding amidst the U.S. withdrawal and the Taliban's routing of Afghan government forces. For this video, I wanted to zoom out and share ideas about what the fall of Kabul means from long-term, macro-scale geopolitical and global economic standpoints. In other words, offer a short but meaningful take on the big picture geoeconomic costs and consequences of what's happened. Following the commentary going around, two pillars of conventional wisdom have become vogue. One, that America has suffered a massive defeat and that this is another sign of American decline. And two, that America's adversaries, mainly China, Russia, and Iran, are ready and capable of jumping in to fill a void left by U.S. withdrawal. Although elements of both positions are correct, realities are much more complicated. Bottom line, I take an opposite view of both assumptions. Here I'll show how America's global positioning long-term is strengthened rather than weakened. First, let's take stock of what the war has meant in terms of lives and economic expenditures. What can be called the post-9/11 Afghanistan war, running from 2001 up until the time of the U.S. withdrawal in 2021, cost an estimated 172,390 lives. 95% of those killed were Afghans, the largest percentage being Afghan military and police, followed by Taliban and Afghan civilians, nearly 165,000 in total. Over 6,000 American military personnel and contractors gave their lives, along with over 1,000 allied forces and more than 500 aid workers and journalists. The grim calculus of these numbers suggests two key points from a military perspective. One, that the Taliban were especially lethal and effective fighters, losing significantly fewer combatants than those lost by Afghan government forces. Two, also that America and its allied partners managed to keep their losses down even less. U.S. active duty service members represent less than 1.5% of all people killed. So although the Taliban have prevailed, the U.S. and its allies during their presence achieved comparatively limited losses. These statistics, of course, gloss over how even a single death represents its own kind of tragedy, but the numbers nevertheless show how American efforts hardly represent a massive military defeat. From a U.S. standpoint, flip side to proportionally limited cost in American lives is the extraordinarily high financial cost of prosecuting a war that relied so much on sophisticated military technology, deploying and paying for more Afghan soldiers and U.S. contractors than U.S. soldiers in the field. U.S. expenditures for conducting the war are estimated at $2.3 trillion, with over $500 billion just used to pay for interest on the debt incurred to finance everything. Estimates of the amount the U.S. will pay in healthcare, disability, and related costs for 4 million Afghanistan and Iraq war veterans add more than another $2 trillion. Making things worse, Washington exacerbated the direct cost with incongruous fiscal policies. To pay for the Vietnam War, President Lyndon Johnson temporarily raised top income tax rates to 77%. Yet at the beginning of the Afghan and Iraq wars, President George W. Bush actually cut tax rates for the wealthiest Americans by at least 8%. Such a reduction in revenue collection, combined with a surge in spending on the war, means that the U.S. has turned to borrowing. Boston University's Pardee School calculates U.S. payments on interest for these wars by 2050 will amount to some $6.5 trillion, and that's just for the amount spent up until 2019. That's a stunning figure, especially when considering how much political effort was required for Congress just to pass a $1 trillion multi-year spending package to improve U.S. infrastructure. So from a large-scale macro perspective, a greater hit to America's national interest has come from its own lack of financial oversight than any military setback. Curiously enough, finances remain one of the key leverage points that the U.S. still holds over the Taliban. Although the Taliban are eager to claim the spoils of victory, they seem to have been caught unaware just how entwined Afghan's economy has become with America since when they were previously ruling the country. For example, the Afghan central bank does not keep all its deposits in country, but rather overseas in the form of safe haven assets like U.S. treasuries and gold. As a result, most of Afghanistan's government capital assets are kept at the U.S. Federal Reserve, which has been delivering cash to the Afghan government every few weeks. From the day of the Taliban's takeover, the U.S. froze some $9 billion in assets belonging to the Afghan central bank, leaving Afghanistan's new rulers essentially cash-strapped. Now, some argue that such financial leverage is insignificant because the Taliban have long controlled the country's informal economy and can rely on proceeds from that. For example, the Taliban is notorious for reaping profits from the production and sale of opium, heroin, and methamphetamine. International analysts have also discovered that the Taliban have gained valuable experience in economic control of some provinces, to include not only narcotics trade, but general commercial activities like fuel distribution. Based on that, they argue that the Taliban already have the ability to effectively run the country economically, so won't be easily swayed by economic pressure from America and its allies. Although that does show that the Taliban not only know how to fight well, but have some economic know-how, that's still a far cry from the expertise needed to manage complex economic activities in urban centers and across an entire nation. Economies of that scale require a functioning central bank and the kind of institutional finance and rule of law that the Taliban does not appear very adept at. So the idea that the Taliban government somehow will be immune from international economic pressure seems unlikely. Moreover, in contrast to the Taliban's rise to power in the 90s, which was originally welcomed by some Afghans, the people of today's Afghanistan have proven less accepting of having the insurgents in charge. Within days of the Taliban's lightning victory, protests against its rule also sprang up.
Protests against the Taliban have now spread to more Afghan cities, and several more people have been killed at the rallies, according to witnesses. This video was filmed by Reuters near one of the protests in the capital, Kabul. A witness in the area said that it appeared to be the Taliban firing their weapons into the air. Although on Wednesday, media reported that Taliban fighters fired directly into a crowd of other protesters in the city of Jalalabad, killing 3 people. And on Thursday, a witness at a protest in the city of Asadabad said more people were killed there.
After these protests, reports of pockets of armed resistance to the Taliban also emerged. We'll have to see how long and how strong challenges to the Taliban's rule will be, but that kind of instability only threatens the Taliban's grip on power. It also threatens to spread destabilization to the surrounding countries that are so eager to capitalize on the foreign power vacuum left in the wake of the U.S. withdrawal. Iran, Pakistan, China, and Russia all have serious internal political issues that instability in Afghanistan can easily exacerbate. Although many describe the U.S. withdrawal as a windfall for these countries, apart from a convenient propaganda opportunity to criticize America, the benefits, in fact, are limited. None of these powers is well positioned to enter Afghanistan militarily to stabilize the situation like America and its allies managed to. Among America's adversaries in the region, economically, China is the best positioned. China certainly has the resources that it could commit to Afghanistan, and the country is a natural fit for Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. In particular, Afghanistan possesses rare earth deposits that Beijing would love to extract. But China's Belt and Road Foreign Economic Program is debt-financed, placing financial burdens on recipient countries for China-managed projects. Belt and Road has become an increasingly tough sell to poorer nations. With the Taliban's national finances in the shape that they are, working out financing deals with China that are acceptable to both sides will be tricky at best. Now, as noted at the beginning of this video, the way the Trump and Biden administrations organized the drawdown of U.S. forces in Afghanistan warrants serious critical reflection. Yet even with the debacle that has followed, the broader rationale behind the withdrawal is far more strategically grounded than the ensuing chaos would suggest.
The United States cannot afford to remain tethered to policies created in response to a world as it was 20 years ago. We need to meet the threats where they are today. Today, the terrorist threat has metastasized beyond Afghanistan.
It's in this sense of realignment of priorities for the U.S. to face current, bigger security and economic challenges that is, long-term, the most significant part of America's extrication from Afghanistan. The strategic benefits to America, of course, are cold comfort to the people of Afghanistan. Having already suffered tremendously, they face an uncertain and potentially disastrous future. The U.S., too, has undeniably suffered from loss of life, wealth, and to its image and standing in the world. Yet, despite these setbacks, the overall long-term geoeconomic positioning for the U.S. has in key ways improved. First, it's finally put a stop to the loss of American life and a hemorrhaging of national finances to pay for the war. Meanwhile, the U.S. still retains significant financial leverage over whatever government holds power in Afghanistan. Despite a humiliating retreat, America still operates the world's largest and most active military force. America likewise still operates the world's largest and most influential economy. U.S. global flexibility has increased, and perhaps, most critically, the American withdrawal, or even if we want to be harsher and call it an abandonment, helps send a message that sovereign states should ultimately take sufficient responsibility for their own defense. Such a posture is far more sustainable than the one that the U.S. adopted over 20 years in Afghanistan. That was essentially a blank check form of support that was poorly deployed by U.S. administrators and abused by wide-scale Afghan government corruption that betrayed not only America's trust, but the obligation to support Afghan military personnel and protect ordinary Afghan citizens. Critics have compared America's pullout from Afghanistan to its pullout from Vietnam, usually adding that the similarities paint a picture of an America in decline. The U.S. military of 2021 is, even with the ignominy of Afghanistan and long after its quagmire in Vietnam, a far better version of what it was 50 years ago. The fall of Saigon and the domino effect of a complete communist takeover in Indochina, terrible that those were, helped spur the U.S. military to rebuild and emerge much stronger and more focused than before. There is an additional revealing economic parallel as well. Following America's failure in Vietnam, another Asian economic superpower, Japan, was seen to be eclipsing the U.S. China's rise versus the U.S. today is described in ways similar to how Japan's rise was described a generation ago. And as with Japan and its claims to offer a superior economic system, China now boasts about overtaking the U.S. with its superior economic model. Though China has indeed emerged as a superpower in its own right and rivals or even exceeds the U.S. in key economic areas, there aren't yet any reliable indicators to support the idea of America being replaced by China in terms of per capita economic power, that is GDP per person, or in things like basic innovative capacity or soft power cultural influence. The reasons for U.S. economic resilience center around features like openness, creativity, support for entrepreneurs, inclusiveness, rule of law, and political plurality and flexibility, elements that rigidly hierarchical countries like Japan and China lack in key respects. In any case, regardless of global economic rivalries, and even an embarrassing military setback in Vietnam and then later in Afghanistan, none of that denigrates those core aspects of America's economic dynamism. Put another way, if the U.S. getting out of Afghanistan actually does parallel the U.S. retreat from Vietnam, it is not a sign of American decline, but of America moving militarily and economically forward with things that it does better at than nation building. That's my take on the main geoeconomic dimensions of what's happened with the fall of the U.S.-backed Afghan government. As with much in world affairs, geoeconomic forces are always in a state of flux, especially in volatile conditions like Afghanistan's, so continual observation will be key to maintain an understanding of what is actually going on. On that note, thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe if you'd like to stay regularly informed on my geoeconomics views of topics like those covered here.